Hey, Doc Testa here. I want to talk today about the movie The Game Changers. Have you seen that movie? It's focused on a plant-based diet with athletes building muscle and performing better. And this is the whole premise behind it, is that you can be a good athlete, you can be a strong power lifter or a bodybuilder or an elite forces military ops person by being, I guess for lack of a better word, vegan or very plant-based, and that we don't need all this animal protein in order to help us gain muscle and strength. And to a very large degree, I agree with that. Now, the movie, of course, takes a strong bias on plant-based eating and plant-based diets. And for the most part, I agree with a lot of it, but I think we have to look at it objectively. And is this the best diet for people to consume? And I'll tell you right now, I don't think there's any one diet that is right for all human beings on this planet. So we can look at, and they did in this movie, a lot of testimonials and people's lives, sort of an N of one, and showing that, yeah, I can go from eating all this meat and animal protein to plant-based proteins and still perform well. So let's talk about this. Let's unpack this a little bit. First off, all of these diets, vegan, vegetarian, carnivore, paleo, keto, all improve our health because we get off a shitty standard American diet. We tend to get rid of refined foods, refined sugar, bad oils, white flour, and fried things. And so simply by removing all of that from our diet, we get healthier, right? Now, we use correlation to assume that just because we did that, that is what's making us healthier. That's like saying people who swallow their spit get cancer, right? There is a correlation. Yeah, people who get cancer have swallowed a lot of their saliva, but that's not the cause of it. And so correlation studies or correlation documentaries and testimonials like this are not necessarily causally and cause and effect oriented. Cause and effect means I did this and this happened. And in order to show that, you have to design a study for that, showing a randomized controlled trial where people are separated, they're giving a certain diet, there's a placebo, and you can control for variables. Now, when we look at correlation data, it's usually as an epidemiological study, meaning we look at a large group of people and we see, who they are, what they ate, and what their health outcomes are like. Now, there's a few problems with that, and I mentioned one. Correlation is not causation, so you can't just say, because I'm plant-based and because I've put on a lot of muscle, that is causally related. There is a strong correlation there. I'm not saying it can't happen. I just want to look at these sort of things objectively and make sure that, what you do in your life is, what's best for your life. So, again, we look at all these diets get you off the crappy standard American diet, including the carnivore diet where you may be eating nose to tail and getting healthier because you took a lot of crap out of your diet. We don't have any long-term data on any of that sort of thing, carnivore diet, so we don't know what the long-term health implications are. The other thing about epidemiological, especially nutrition studies, is some of them might run 20 years, but they might only ask the question about your diet 2 or 3 times in that 20-year period. Now, I don't know about you, but I sure as hell don't remember what I ate last Tuesday, or how frequently I might be eating beans, or how often I might eat pizza. When you ask people these questions, our memory and recall is not as sharp as we have bias in thinking. So we come into these things with a lot of built-in bias about what we think we're doing to be healthy. So there's this bias with these epidemiological studies, especially when they don't ask the questions frequently enough to get good data. And I've seen some studies where they've asked the question maybe 3 times in 20 years. How often do you eat red meat? How often do you eat processed foods? How often do you eat beans and legumes? How often do you eat vegetables? Who knows? Who can even remember? So there's that. Then there's selection bias, where we look at these types of diets and go, we're going to look at vegans or vegetarians and see how long they live or how healthy they are. Now, again, there's bias in that selection, right? Vegans, vegetarians, people who are doing keto, paleo, they tend to be healthier. They tend to not smoke. They tend to not drink alcohol in excess. They tend to exercise. They tend to get good sleep. They tend to have good relationships. All of these are involved in our health and how our health outcomes. Now, it's super difficult to do a causation study. It's expensive. You pretty much would have to lock people away for a period of time and provide all of the food for them and not let them eat anything else. And so you're tracking the macros and the quality and quantity of food and calories. Are they eating a lot of vegetables? What are they actually eating? And then, randomize that study and look at people and say, okay, in this group who we fed this, their outcome was that, and the control arm that maybe was fed something else, or I don't even know how you could design a placebo around this, but it becomes very difficult and very expensive. So it's important to look at these causation, correlation studies. The other thing about vegans and vegetarians, and please don't take offense to this, because I'm largely in a camp, mostly based on what I believe is scientific, is that there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, religious fervor around it. Like, I'm right, I'm better, I'm higher, I'm healthier, I'm doing it right, and you're doing it wrong. And that certainly is not helpful when you're trying to guide people to a healthy lifestyle, particularly revolving around diet. Some people get involved in these different eating programs, especially plant-based, to save the earth, versus because it makes sense based on evidence. Now, that's another thing to take a look at. And so, again, is Game Changers right for you? Well, that's something you have to try out for yourself. There are healthy vegans and healthy vegetarians who eat plants, unrefined, eat very healthy. And then there are the unhealthy vegans and vegetarians. I mean, I can eat potato chips and waffles with syrup and call it vegan. And I sure wouldn't consider that healthy. Now, let's talk about some of the things that really do drive health and longevity, which we know about. And it's largely glucose. Too much elevated glucose in our blood from largely the standard American diet and refined carbohydrates and sugar and high fructose corn syrup. And then what else drives aging? Well, we know too much animal protein upregulates mTOR, the mammalian target of rapamycin, which stimulates insulin-like growth factor and growth hormones that stimulate cancer growth and can become a continuous cycle of aggravating insulin, glucose, and stimulated by animal protein. So, are plant-based diets healthier? I'm going to say yes. I eat an 80-20 whole food plant-based diet and about 20% animal protein because I do think animal protein can upregulate mTOR in a good way. mTOR is involved in maintaining a good immune system health. It stimulates muscle mass, especially as we get older and where we start to get sarcopenia or loss of muscle mass. And it's not to say you can't do that with plant-based protein, because you can. Quinoa is a complete protein. You can get complete amino acid profiles from beans and grains. And so you can get healthy benefits of stimulating mTOR through plant-based protein. But again, at the same time, we want to make sure we're not upregulating or driving insulin and glucose levels to elevated levels that cause other health-related effects, such as inflammation or prediabetes or things along that nature, because inflammation in and of itself causes diseases of aging, diabetes, heart disease, dementia, and arthritis. So there's a fine line here. And look, high animal protein upregulates inflammation as well. So when you take a group of NFL football players off of fried chicken or barbecue before a game, and I know this for a fact because we've worked with a lot of NFL players, they eat like crap. They eat high levels of animal protein, largely not healthy cooked, and they bombard that mTOR pathway. And as you can see, what that does for them is it makes them huge, and it causes inflammation. And that's why the average age of death of an NFL football player is in their early 50s. The trauma, the inflammation, the steroids, the pain meds, the surgeries, it all drives it. So, and is that a healthy selection bias? Are those guys not drinking alcohol, getting good sleep, not necessarily doing drugs? Again, there's so many things that go into our life and our health besides whether we're a whole food, plant-based vegan or not. And a couple more things and then I'll wrap this rant up. So the Mediterranean diet, right? Mediterranean diet, largely whole food, plant-based, beans, nuts, legumes, olive oil, and yes, animal protein. But about 20% of the diet is that. Now, I'm not saying 20% of the macros. I'm saying 4 out of 21 meals a week are animal protein, and they didn't have access to tons of it, so they didn't eat lots of it. They ate off the land of what was around them. They also exercised, so there's some selection bias. They probably didn't smoke. Many of them in the blue zones around the world that live over 100 drink wine every night, but they also socialize, and they have a strong social interaction and some sort of religious connection. So I hope you can see that there's not just one driver of good health. There is no such diet like that. I do believe a whole food plant-based diet is largely probably a better thing to do. But let me tell you about the low carb, high fat conference I was at this year, where numerous overweight, sick physicians got on stage who are carnivore for the last 6 months or 12 months and doing it right, eating nose to tail. You can't just eat the ribeye, my friends, and bacon. If you're going to do this, you've got to eat the organ meat as well. And that also provides macronutrients that don't just come in the muscle of the animal. So macronutrients do come from vegetables, from beans, legumes, fruits, and they're also generally low in sugar, so they don't upregulate the insulin glucose pathways, and they are in complete protein, so they don't bombard that mTOR pathway, which I think leads to longevity and healthier longevity. I eat this way. This is what I recommend to people I take care of, my loved ones and people I treat. And so I just want you to think about this when you're going into these things. Is the movie Game Changers right for you? Is a vegan diet the right way to be? I've seen plenty of vegans who avoid oils, plant-based oils, who they don't look healthy. And there are some where I can tell their brain is not working healthy. And there's been studies out of Italy and Spain looking at high consumption of olive oil, and these people seem to have some healthier longevity. Keep in mind, I do know that's an epidemiology, and correlation, not causation. So we have to take a lot of this, not necessarily with a grain of salt, but we have to look at diet from multiple points of view and look back at our history as Homo sapiens and how did we eat. And look, I was in China for a few weeks studying acupuncture. It was like 90% vegetables and little amounts of meat, even if it was served with meat with each meal, or not, wasn't even served with each meal. It was served once a day, and it was like 1 or 2 bites. So in our cultures, we didn't have access to all that. You think about hunters and gatherers, they were not killing tons of animals and eating this all the time. When I work with athletes that are in eating a lot of protein, I ask them, where the hell did your grandparents get 10 chicken breasts? This is unnatural to sustain. So I'm looking at it from a lot of different angles. I'm looking at the research. I'm looking at the studies as much as they can be valuable. I want to collaborate and corroborate epidemiology studies. I want to find history from the blue zones, people that live to be 100 centenarians. What are they eating? What did our ancestors eat? And when did we start to introduce refined and processed things into our diet that caused us to go off the rails? And look, if you look back 50 years ago when NASA, we just had the 50-year landing of the moon, and we look back at those people just 50 years ago, there was no obesity. So something started to happen in the 80s, and you look, part of it goes back to big agriculture and big farm subsidies, subsidizing corn. We didn't have a need for all that corn, so we started creating high fructose corn syrup, started putting it in things, and we start to see an increase in obesity. And sadly right now, this is driving diabetes and the leading cause of liver disease, fatty liver, caused by these types of diets. So look, high fructose corn syrup is vegan. I wouldn't eat that crap if you gave it to me for free. It's not healthy. So we have to look at all these diets a little bit with a grain of salt and find out what works best for us. If you are quantifying your biometrics, heart rate variability, calories, resting heart rate, sleep, strength, body mass index, etc., make some dietary changes and see how it works for you. Simply getting off the standard American diet is going to move the needle for you, but it doesn't necessarily mean that carnivore, vegan, vegetarian, paleo, or keto is right for you. You got to test yourself out. Now, again, I'm going to leave it here. I recommend, personally, I believe a whole food plant-based diet is probably the healthiest way for human beings to eat with a little bit of animal protein. And let's not forget that canine. We have those for a reason. So look, if you have questions, post them, let me know. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. Let me know if you saw the movie, what you think about it. And I hope this is just good food for thought, no pun intended. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot.